Jai Anilo Premadano Karma Kacho
Ki, Ananda Koti Vaishnava Ki, Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ki, Rendika Hosi Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Hatarita Gadadhar Shiva Shadi Gold Bhakta Vrida Ki, Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Shyama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki, Vrindavan Dham Ki, Mathura Dham Ki, Navadip Dham Ki, Purnamai Ki, Ganga Devi Ki, Bhakti Devi Ki, Tulsi Devi Ki, Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki, Sankirtan Yagna Ki, Sri Sri Radha Kalachandji Dham Ki, all glories to the Central Devotee, all glories to the Central Devotee, all glories to the Central Devotee, Gauda Premanandi. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 10. Bhagavatam is the answer to all questions. Text number 20. Nasike nirabhidyetam dadhuyati nabhasvati tatra Gandhavaho Dhyano Nasi Jigrixataha Nasike nirabhidyetam Doduyate nabhavasvati Tatra vayur gandhavaho Grano nasi jigrikshata Nasike nirabhidyetam Dodhuyati navasvati Tatat vayur gandhavaho Nasike nirabhidyetam Dodhuyati nibhavasvati Dodhuyate nivashvati Tatra vayur gandhavaho Brahmo nasi nigrixataha In the nostrils. Being developed. Dadhuyati. Rapidly blowing. Navasvati. Air respiration. Tatra. Thereupon. Vayu. Air. Gandhavaha. Smelling odor. Grahanaha. Sense of smell. Nasi. In the nose. Jigrikstataha. Desiring to smell odors. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Thereafter, when the Supreme Purusha desired to smell odors, the nostrils and respiration were generated. The nasal instrument and odors came into existence, and the controlling deity of air, carrying smell, also became manifested. Purport by Prabhupada. The nasal instrument, odor, and the controlling deity, air, smelling, etc., all became manifested simultaneously when the Lord desired to smell. The Vedic mantras confirm this statement in the Upanishad's statement that everything is first desired by the Supreme before the subordinate living entity can act upon it. The living entity can see only when the Lord sees. The living entity can smell when the Lord smells, and so on. The idea is that the living entity cannot do anything independently. He can simply think of doing something independently, but he cannot act independently. This independence in thinking is there by the grace of the Lord, but the thinking can be given shape by the grace of the Lord, and therefore the common saying is that man proposes and God disposes. The whole explanation is on the subject of the absolute dependence of the living entities and absolute independence of the Supreme Lord. Less intelligent persons claiming to be on an equal level with God must first prove themselves to be absolute and independent, and then they must substantiate their claim to being one with God. This text and the other texts here not only explain about how the manifestation takes place, although there is certainly a sequence of manifestations, beginning with the Supreme Lord, the Supreme Purusha. Purusha means person. And that is at the heart of this purport. A person has desires. That which has no personality cannot have desires. So immediately we are told that the Supreme is a person. I told this again and again. It may be a type of accepted knowledge now by us after so many years, but it is not an accepted fact in general by most people. When you ask most people their idea about God, most of them will reply with some impersonal conception. Srila Prabhupada's books are addressed especially to the devotees, but also to the population in general. And in fact, we are not so far away from being that population in general. There was a time not so long ago that we may also have had an impersonal understanding about the Lord, which means that there's always that possibility. Although it is very hard to go from impersonalism, from personalism to impersonalism. Prabhupada makes that point that amongst the great learned sages there are a number of instances where an impersonalist became a personalist. Can anyone mention any of them? Yes, the four Kumars are very well-known impersonalists. And when they, well, here it is, right? The desire to smell. When they smelled, just by their smelling tendency, they smelled the tulsi buds mixed with sandal paste that was smearing the lotus feet of Lord Narayan. And that fragrance was so powerful because they were on a very elevated level. Right? Their nose was not like our nose, you know, which we have to constantly blow with tissue, right? Blow in tissues and clear it. Their nose was not like that. It is, in fact, we can say that practically they had the ability to smell with every pore of their body. So that when they breathed in the fragrance of the tulsi and sandalwood, it was, you know, overwhelming. They practically fainted. And they experienced God. When we breathe in tulsi and sandalwood, what do we experience? Tulsi and sandalwood. When Lord Chaitanya, when we eat prasadam, what do we experience? Right? The decrease of hunger. Isn't it? Or maybe some satisfying pleasure on the tongue. But when Lord Chaitanya tasted Krishna Prasad, what did he experience? Yeah, he directly experienced Krishna. As we somehow get some sense of Krishna through each of our senses, but we are limited in our ability to experience Krishna. But pure devotees or great personalities, they have a total experience, which is just overwhelming, and they faint. That's the description Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur gives. He says that the devotee faints and is revived again and again, and faints again and again, experiencing this experience of God consciousness, Krishna consciousness. So, person, everything requires personality. All of this discussion involves personality. But there's something more here. There's a connection being made between the breathing of the Lord and practically everything. If you look at this chapter, you will see that this chapter connects the entire creation. It connects the entire existence. It connects everything within our experience. Because everything within our experience is experienced by the five senses. At least everything within the external experience comes about through the use of the five senses. Right? The eyes, the nose, the ears, the tongue, and the sense of touch. And everything that goes on internally is experienced through the use of the mind, the intellect, and the ego. Now, beyond that, what else is there? In terms of our own understanding, what can it be beyond what we understand externally through our senses and internally through our subtle body or subtle senses? And this chapter informs us that each and every experience, that means the ability to experience, the organs of experience, and the objects of experience, whether they be gross or subtle, they're all derived from Krishna, from God, by his experience. So everything is connected in this chapter to the Supreme Lord. Why? Because there's an intention on the part of Vyasa and Sukadeva Goswami. There's a rhyme to the reason. Right? The reasoning that they have has a particular purpose behind it. And that purpose is brought out by Prabhupada in the purport. What is that purpose? Our dependency upon the Lord. All of this is meant to convince us that we are fully dependent beings. What is the nature of modern society today? That man declares his independence from God. Right? Just like the Declaration of Independence is, that was a mundane document in one sense, to declare that we are, independent of some foreign power. But everybody today is more or less making a declaration of independence from God. And what is this? What is the cause of this? Here we are informed ignorance. And that's not the initial cause, but at least that is the ongoing cause. If we want to get to the original cause, we could say envy. We were envious of God. But the secondary cause is as a result of that envy, or even if you want to go, I think we could argue either way, envy or ignorance. We were envious because of ignorance, or we became ignorant as a result of envy of God. But in any case, we are now ignorant of all of these connections. That's the point. The Bhagavatam is trying to give us enlightenment, to enlighten us, to give us knowledge of how everything in existence is connected, interconnected. Now, today, physicists, scientists also understand this interconnectedness. It used to be that, the world was seen in like a hierarchical sense, and even today it still is seen that way practically. But when you get down to scientific, in ways that scientists, mundane scientists, see things in terms of particles or waves, then that hierarchy, there is a hierarchy, but it works in a different way. It doesn't have to do necessarily only with species, but there, in any case, there's an interconnectedness with everything. The difference is that there's no personalism in that explanation. And as soon as you take out what goes along with personality, volition, or will, when you talk about a person, what makes someone, what is the difference between a person and an inanimate object? An inanimate object has no volition, has no willpower. This desk does not have any willpower. But we as human beings do. And if we envision the whole existence, as something impersonal, then where is the will? Is there any will in there? And if there's no will, is there any ultimate meaning? Whereas if we can see everything in connection with an original person, who we understand as God, then that God is a person, he has will, he has purpose, and his creation has purpose. And that gives us purpose, providing that we understand his purpose. What is the whole purpose of religion? What is the whole meaning of religion? What's the essence of religion? To understand the desire of God. That's the purpose of religion. To understand the desire of God. Now, Purush means also enjoyer, and this tells us something about the desire of God. In fact, it's easy to become convinced of this religion because at the heart of this religion is enjoyment. Krishna is the supreme enjoyer. Now that's something that everybody can relate to because everyone wants to enjoy. Our only problem is we're not succeeding. That's the cause of misery. That's the cause of competition. That's the cause of the material world. Our failure to succeed as enjoyers. But we're shown a perfect example, a perfect enjoyer. An enjoyer who has so much enjoyment, so much happiness, that he says, I have ample amount of happiness which I can share unlimitedly with every other living being. You just have to, again, understand things in a proper connection or relationship. If you try to enjoy separately from me, it's not going to work. It's not going to work because it's a sign of ignorance. You are not recognizing the organic, natural connections that exist, as it's mentioned here. When the Supreme Person desired to smell odors, the nostrils and respiration were generated, and the nasal instrument and odors came into existence, and the controlling deity of air, carrying smell, also became manifest. We don't see all of these things. We just think, this is my nose. Maybe a lady will think, I'll put a nose pin in my nose. Or, you know, it depends, you know, people do so many things with their noses. But nobody thinks about all these connections. You know, working, how the nose functions. The science gives us explanations of how the nose functions. But it doesn't include some of these. It doesn't include the Supreme Purusha, right? It doesn't include the controlling deity of air, Vayu. So Vayu is left out, Vishnu is left out, and then we're left with just inanimate explanations, mundane explanations. The whole point of this is to bring in the sacred, to bring in the spiritual. And that's what's happening here. To bring into this explanation that which is spiritual. Because we're living in a highly materialistic society in which the sacred has been lost. It's lost. You go to work. What has it got to do with your religion? What has it got to do with your spiritual life? You have family. When I say you, I said people, okay, in general. Have families. What does that have to do with spiritual life? And if you analyze practically the whole society we're living in, there's a complete loss of what is sacred. So these books are blueprints. They're directives to tell us how to reinstate the sacred into our present life. And the whole process of Krishna consciousness is also meant to do that. From the moment you get up, you take a bath. Why? And the way you take a bath. It's so, everything is based on the sacred. Right? There's an order, for example, to how we bathe. We pass urine or stool, then we bathe. I'm sure many people don't even know that there's any reason to put it in that order. They may take a bath and then pass urine or stool. Right? I mean, it's hard to know what the order is supposed to be, because they have no meaning behind it. But we know that the purpose of our taking a bath is what? But why? Why do we want to be purified? Because we want to come in front of the deity. We want to see Krishna, and we want Krishna to see us, and we don't want to present ourselves in a contaminated condition. So there's a whole order, and we don't just bathe our bodies externally. In the process of taking the bath, we also wash our mouths, because we understand that the process of passing stool and urine contaminates not only the external body, but your breathing in. So we try to wash all the different holes of the body, so that the whole body is cleansed, as far as we can do it physically, right? And then what do we start to do? We start to chant mantras, which purify the subtle body. And all of this is to bring us into contact, connection with the Supreme Lord, who is said to be pavitram, pure. We understand that in order to associate with God, you have to be godly. And cleanliness is next to godliness, so we start with that. Then what do? We mark our bodies with tilak. Why? Sometimes people suggest, why don't you give up wearing tilak? Then you could, blend in more. But is that really our intention? You see, these tilaks, they have a purpose. Marking the body, it's like a tattoo. Right? It's a tattoo put on with clay. And this is a very old system. Not just in higher religious cultures, even in very primitive cultures. They used to mark their bodies to designate, which tribe or which clan they belong to. And you see the same, don't you? Amongst the different sects. You see the different types of tilaks. And again, what is the tilak made of? The tilak is not just some ordinary earth. But the clay itself has some sacred connection. It's from the Ganges River, or it's from a place in Dwarka where the gopis, came at one point, or the clay that was brought there from Vrindavan. It was mixed with the dust from the feet of the gopis, so it's called Gopi Chanda. Again, we're connected, The Ganges touched the lotus feet, the toes of Krishna. The gopis, the most dear devotees of Krishna, touch the clay, so that goes on our bodies. It identifies us as members of a group. Why is that so important? Because without a group, where's religion? What is the name of this society? The International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Not the international, individual, right? The individual for Krishna Consciousness. This is an international society. We don't call this the individual for Krishna. Prabhupada could have called it that. Why didn't Prabhupada, when he founded this movement, say, this movement is called the Individual for Krishna Consciousness? That makes sense. And that English, the English is fine, but what's wrong with that? Because without the benefit, without social, interaction, religion doesn't take place. This is not a phenomenon that comes out of individual effort. You analyze every single part of the process of Krishna consciousness has somehow been entwined with society. But a special kind of society. A society of devotees, not a society of ordinary persons who have no connection with something sacred. So tilak designates us. It reminds us again and again. When you wear tilak, you can't forget. You're stamped. And that's why people erase it, so that you can, at least other people won't see you that way. And it's unfortunate that the world has come to the point now where it's practically forced devotees to do that. unfortunate. I mean, one of the reasons we like to go to India, why do we go to India? Because then you can wear your tilak without feeling ashamed. Right? You could be in Mayapur, Vrindavan, where someone who's not wearing tilak is out of place. One of the reasons that Prabhupada wanted us to go there is to give us the strength that comes with numbers. If we get some strength just with 50 or 60 people here, what to speak of the strength we gain, when you're in a whole town or city with tens of thousands of tilak wearers. Now, the dhoti and the sari does the same thing. It's a type of dress. For us, it really is symbolic. More so than, say, it was traditional, because traditionally it was just dress. But for us, it's a statement. When you put on a dhoti, usually you're going to put on a dhoti. Why? To come in the temple room. Because you're coming in front of Krishna. Right? You go to a South Indian temple, you can't wear, for the men, right, you can't wear stitched clothing on the top part of the body, isn't it? You have to take off your shirt. They got rules like that. And you have to take off your shoes, because they're not clean. And, this goes into so many, you'll see if you analyze how religion works, how every part of the ritual which we follow is meant to establish our connectedness with Krishna, to make us more and more dependent, so that we get to the point where we think, well, I cannot live without Krishna. What is Lord Chaitanya's mood? I cannot live without Krishna. This is the Buddha, Srimati Radharani. If for a moment I stop seeing Krishna, I will die. But we, because of being practiced at being independent, we don't die. In fact, if we feel that if I had to be in the temple room all day, I wouldn't die. That's like that. Which is a condition. That's our diseased condition. We haven't come to that stage. But we're trying to, and all of these things are meant to bring us to that stage. Prasad, you see, you should get to the point where you can't allow food to go into your mouth which is not Krishna Prasad. Now, under extreme circumstances, one may have to break that principle to the point where Prabhupada even mentions that one great Vaishnava Acharya even ate meat, which is not, a license for meat, obviously. It was a very extreme circumstance. But one should not want to take anything inside, because you will be separated from Krishna. The statement is that when you eat food which has not been offered to Krishna it's not prasadam, then the mind becomes polluted and you can't remember Krishna. Now you can say, well, how does it all work? Well, the reality is that's what happens. However it may work. Forget about trying to get some chemical explanation or even a theological explanation. We could give it. I mean, that's what the Catholics do. They get the theological explanation for the sacrament. It's transubstantiated. It changes its nature. All right, we also say so. But the reality, the final proof of it is, the more you start eating food which is not first offered in sacrifice, right, Yajna Shishta, it has an effect on your consciousness. So you should come to the point where you just can't, it's just like, you can see Bhaktivedanta Goswami, right? When he got offered that curd, that buttermilk, where's this buttermilk from? I mean, he had gotten to the point, because that goes to another level of Krishna consciousness. And what we're talking now is very fundamental, basic dependency upon God. But it comes to further stages of higher understanding. If we only talk about those other stages, there's a problem, because so much of our activity is not yet on that level. You know? So first of all, that's why you see Prabhupada speaks practically in his purports on most fundamental basic principles. Like Bhaktivedanta Swami said, 6 principles, right? You know, like total dependency. Saranagati are very basic principles, aren't they? They're not yet talking about what Bhaktivedanta Swami says when he's handed some buttermilk and he's told that it comes from the village of, you know, Radharani's competitor. I mean, that's not in the 6 stages of surrender immediately, is it? Not, at least not obviously there, right? But that's the level at which he's come to. He's not prepared to just eat any prasad. His next question is, I want to know whose prasad is it? You know, and he's so focused on what his worshipable object is, that unless it's Radharani's prasad, he's not going to touch it. You know, if it comes from the wrong place, from the wrong hands of the wrong persons who happen to be servitors of Radharani's rival, he says, I don't want it. He throws it down, becomes furious, and throws a fit. What did you do giving me this? Now that's a very advanced stage. That is a very advanced stage. We have to come to the most basic principle stage, which we are still struggling with, of how to bring Krishna into each and every action of our life. And actually, this is the purpose of Krishna consciousness. And what is the purpose of having children? What is the purpose? Is it just the result of a sexual act? Hardly. I don't think so. No devotee thinks that, you know, that's the reason. I just had to have sex. And, no, that's nonsense, because it only takes one sexual act to produce a child. It may only take one act, so it couldn't be that that's the only reason. There's a very clear will. No, I want to do service to Krishna, you see, by having a child and raising a child in Krishna consciousness. That's a very big service. That is a huge service. That's a service, you know, I can't imagine. I can only go through this undergraduate course of study because I know there's an end in sight. But raising a child is practically no end in sight, isn't it? 20, 25 years, it's like just having disciples, no end in sight. Well, why do we do those things? To help us to become Krishna conscious. And the whole point of trying to teach a child, what are we trying to teach a child? Everything has a relationship with Krishna. That's Krishna consciousness. Wherever you look, you see its relationship with Krishna. You see Krishna everywhere. And originally, society was like that. That was sacred. The whole society, not the life, the world that people lived in was full of the sacred. And gradually that has now changed until the present day and age when, what do we have left? We have to go to a building where the sacred is housed. The church, the temple, the synagogue, the mosque. But that's not the way it was originally. There was no need, particularly, of temple. Why does temple worship, you can see it comes in Dwapara Yuga, right? In Satya Yuga, everyone was Krishna conscious everywhere. Everything was Krishna conscious. But gradually, by the Dwapara Yuga, it became localized in the temple. And in the Kali Yuga, even that gets obliterated. In one sense, although we put a lot of energy into making temples, the fact is that, you know, what is the temple now is, or what is the, you know, a holy name, it becomes the most prominent of all the deities. Because people just have to come to that simple point, the holy name. Not everybody can worship the deity. They knew, not the great personalities knew what would happen in this day and age, how contaminating the world would be. It's hard, you know. I mean, we try our best to stay pure, to get up onto the altar, but it's very difficult. You got to wear contaminated shoes, and really speaking, your whole body becomes contaminated. And it's very hard to remain suci, to really be suci. Therefore, the recommended process for worshiping God in this age is chanting Hare Krishna, chanting the holy names of God. It doesn't depend on any externals, as long as you can chant. So this is what's behind this chapter, right? And it's a very important chapter. Everything is trying to show us that the world is created as a sacred place. That there's nothing that's not sacred. Everything is sacred. So that you will feel surrounded by Krishna. If you really see properly, you'll see Krishna in everything, everywhere in everything, and in every act. That's Krishna consciousness. Anybody have any questions or comments? Good. I'm going to stop there. Since there are none. The other question.
I was speaking with a devotee the other day after class, and he was speaking to me about some of the last words that Srila Prabhupada stated when he was leaving in Vrindavan, he was leaving this world, and he said how everything is moving and acting by the supreme will of Krishna. His consciousness is Krishna consciousness. And this devotee was explaining to me how he was bewildered by that statement.
Well, then just send him a copy of my tape.
Yeah, that's what the class.
Send him a copy of the tape. Then he won't be bewildered. John. Shri Radha Kalachandji ki, Shri Prabhupada ki, Gaur Bhaktivedanta ki, Gaur